At 8 a.m., a police officer burst into my house. "Sir, there's an eviction order. You need to leave the house." I froze when I saw my own son and daughter-in-law standing across the street smirking with satisfaction at having stripped their father of his assets while I was lying in a hospital bed. They thought I was a senile old man, easy to deceive, but they didn't know I had kept medical evidence that could send them both to prison. In court, I said just one sentence that made both their faces turn deathly pale. "I truly appreciate you being here." Drop a comment. What would you do if your own child tried to evict you? I'm curious to hear your take. If you're wondering what that courtroom sentence was, stay with me. Quick note. This is a fictional story exploring family betrayal and justice. The scenarios are crafted, but the themes resonate. Let's continue. The morning had started the way Mondays should quiet predictable mine. I was out in the garden at 7:30 tending to the old oak tree my father planted back when Eisenhower was president. 80 years that tree had stood roots going deeper than memory. I'd learned to care for it the same way Dad taught me, slow, steady, with respect for what came before. The watering can was heavy in my hand as I moved around the base, letting the water soak in rather than rush over. Charleston mornings in late March still carried a chill, but the sun was warming the bricks of my single house behind me. 47 Pitt Street, my home for 30 years. I heard the knock before I registered what it meant. It wasn't the casual tap of a neighbor or the quick double rap of a delivery driver. This was different, firm, methodical, the kind of sound that doesn't ask permission. 3 heavy knocks that said authority had arrived. I set the watering can down and straightened up, wiping my hands on my work pants. My first thought was simple confusion. Who knocks like that at 8 on a Monday morning? When I reached the front door, I could see a shape through the beveled glass. Tan uniform, broad shoulders. Official. I opened the door. The man on my porch was in his late 30s, wearing a Charleston County Sheriff's Office uniform with a black vest. His face was professionally neutral, but his eyes weren't unkind. He held a clipboard, and behind him at the curb sat a white patrol car with the county seal on the door. Mr. Harold Mitchell. That's me. I kept my hand on the doorframe, not quite understanding yet, but feeling something wrong settling into my chest. "I'm Deputy Michael Torres with the Charleston County Sheriff's Office. I'm here regarding a writ of possession." I stared at him. "A writ of what?" "Possession, sir. It's an eviction order." My stomach dropped. "There must be some mistake," I said. "This is my house." Deputy Torres didn't argue. He'd probably heard that line 100 times before. "Sir, I'm not here to debate ownership. I'm here to execute a court order. You have until Friday at noon to vacate the property." Friday. Noon. 4 days. I looked past him toward the street, trying to make sense of this, and that's when I saw them. Across the street, standing next to a Honda sedan, were my son and his wife. Brandon, 38 years old, wearing jeans and a jacket, arms crossed, staring at the ground. And Christine, blonde, put together even at 8 in the morning, standing with her weight on one hip. She wasn't looking at the ground. She was looking directly at me, and she was smiling. Not a big smile, not cruel, just satisfied. My breath caught. Deputy Torres was still talking, but the words weren't landing. I was staring at my son, at 2 people I'd welcomed into my home, fed at my table, trusted. They were watching. Brandon glanced up for just a second, and our eyes met across the asphalt. I saw something flicker in his face, guilt maybe, and then he looked away fast. But Christine didn't look away. "Sir," Deputy Torres pulled me back. "Did you hear me?" I turned to him. "I'm sorry." "What?" He held the clipboard toward me. "These are the court orders. You'll need to review them." I took the papers. They felt heavier than they should have. Deputy Torres gestured toward the top page. The plaintiff names are listed right here. I looked where his finger pointed. Plaintiff Brandon Mitchell and Christine Mitchell. The words swam for a second. My son. My own son had filed this. Mr. Mitchell, do you understand what I've told you? I nodded slowly. I understand. You have until Friday at noon. If you're not out by then, I'll be back to remove you and your belongings. Understood. He looked at me for another moment. I'm sorry, sir. I know this isn't easy. He turned and walked down the steps. I stood in the doorway holding the papers, watching him get into his patrol car. He didn't look at Brandon and Christine as he drove past them. But I did. Brandon was staring at his shoes now, shoulders hunched. Christine was still watching me, arms folded across her chest. I didn't wave. I didn't shout. I didn't ask them why. I just stood there, an old man in work clothes, holding a stack of legal papers that said his own child wanted him gone. The patrol car turned the corner and disappeared. A neighbor's dog barked. A mockingbird sang from the oak tree. I stepped back inside and closed the door. The house was quiet. Too quiet. I walked to the living room and sat on the couch, the same one Elizabeth and I had picked out 20 years ago, the one Brandon used to nap on as a boy. I set the papers on the coffee table and stared at them. Brandon Mitchell and Christine Mitchell versus Harold Mitchell. My son was suing me. For my home, the home his grandfather built. The home I'd kept and cared for and planned to leave to him someday. And he'd done it in secret. Filed papers, gotten a judgment, sent the sheriff to my door. I looked up at the mantel where a framed photo sat Brandon at age 10, holding a fish we'd caught off Folly Beach, gap-toothed and grinning. That boy had loved me once. I didn't know when that changed. I picked up the papers again and started reading. The living room felt smaller than it had 10 minutes ago. I spread the documents across the coffee table and started reading. The first page listed the case number and a term I'd never heard used about me before: unlawful detainer action. They were calling me a tenant in my own home. I moved to the second page, the return of service. The address jumped out immediately, 1240 Ashley River Road. I hadn't thought about that place in years. It was a small apartment in West Ashley that Brandon had helped me find after Elizabeth died. I'd lived there for maybe 8 months, just long enough to learn how to sleep alone again. That was 2016. I hadn't been back since. But according to this document, that's where the court had sent all the notices. And according to the signature line, someone had accepted them on my behalf. Christine Mitchell. Adult occupant. Substitute service accepted. My daughter-in-law had signed for legal papers at an address I hadn't lived at in 9 years, knowing I'd never see them. The next page was labeled Exhibit a Rental Agreement. I read it twice. The document claimed I'd been renting 47 Pitt Street from Brandon and Christine since January. $200 a month. My signature sat at the bottom. I'd never seen this paper before in my life. But there it was, attached to a court filing used as evidence that I was a tenant who'd stopped paying. This wasn't a mistake. This was deliberate. Someone had forged my name to build a paper trail. The last page made my hands shake. Quitclaim deed. Recorded March 18, 2025. The deed transferred ownership of 47 Pitt Street from me to Brandon. No money exchanged, just a simple transfer, signed and notarized. The signature looked like mine, close enough that someone unfamiliar might believe it. But I knew. The pressure was wrong. Someone had traced it, probably from an old card or check. The date stared back at me. March 15th. I remembered that day clearly. I'd been in the hospital room 417 at MUSC admitted for pneumonia. I'd spent March 15th drifting in and out of consciousness, breathing through a mask that made everything taste like plastic. I hadn't signed anything that day. I couldn't have. The notary's name was printed at the bottom, Jennifer Blake. Date and time March 15th, 12 o'clock p.m. While I was in a hospital bed, someone had forged my signature and gotten it notarized. This wasn't just fraud. This was theft with paperwork. I reached for my phone. Charles Donovan answered on the second ring. "Harold, you know it's 8:30 on a Monday, right?" "I know." My voice came out steadier than I felt. "Charles, I need help." The roughness in his voice disappeared. What happened? I told him everything. The deputy at my door, Brandon and Christine watching, the forged lease, the fake service address, the deed signed while I was sedated. Charles didn't interrupt. When I finished, there was a long pause. "Harold," he said finally, "this is fraud, clear as daylight, but we need to move fast." "How fast?" "You've got until Friday at noon, right?" I heard papers rustling. "That gives us 4 days. We need to file an emergency motion first thing tomorrow morning." Emergency motion for what? To stay the writ, stop the eviction, and vacate the default judgment. They got that judgment because you never showed up to court. But you never showed up because you were never properly served. The service address is fraudulent. A judge will see that. I felt the first flicker of hope. "You think we can win? I think we can fight. And yeah, I think we've got a good shot." He paused. "But Harold, you need to understand something. If they forged that deed, faked service, created a rental agreement out of thin air, this isn't just civil anymore. This is criminal." The word hung between us. Criminal. My son could go to jail. "We'll deal with that when we get there," Charles said, gentler now. "First thing is keeping you in your house. Meet me at the courthouse tomorrow morning, 8:30. Bring everything ID, utility bills, anything showing you live at Pitt Street. And bring hospital records if you've got discharge papers." "I do." "Good. We'll file the motion request an emergency hearing and make them explain to a judge how they served you at an address you haven't lived at in 9 years. "Charles," I said, "I can't pay you what you're worth." He made a sound that might have been a laugh. "Harold, you helped me rebuild my porch when my hip was busted. You sat with me when Martha had surgery. You're family. We don't charge family." My throat tightened. "Thank you." "Don't thank me yet. Thank me when we win." He paused. "I'm sorry it's your son doing this. I know that hurts." "Yeah," I said quietly. "It does." After I hung up, I sat staring at the papers. Everything I'd worked for, everything my father had built, reduced to forged signatures and lies. My eyes drifted to the mantel, to the photo I'd looked at 1,000 times, Brandon at 10 on Folly Beach, holding up a flounder we'd caught face split with a gap-toothed grin. That boy had loved me. He'd hold my hand crossing the street. He'd ask me to check for monsters under his bed. I didn't know when that changed, when I became someone worth stealing from. But I knew one thing: I wasn't going down without a fight. I stared at the date on the quitclaim deed, March 15th, and remembered that day with painful clarity. 3 weeks ago, I had been lying in room 417 at MUSC Hospital, hooked up to monitors that beeped in steady rhythm. The pneumonia had hit me hard on the 13th, a deep, rattling cough fever that soaked through my shirt's chest pain, sharp enough to make me call 911. By the 14th, I was admitted. By the 15th, I was barely conscious. I remember fragments of that morning. The orderly came in around 7, the light through the window still gray and weak. He said something about imaging, about needing pictures of my lungs. I nodded, or thought I did. Everything felt distant, wrapped in cotton. The sedatives they'd given me the night before hadn't worn off, and the fever kept pulling me under. They wheeled me out on a gurney. I remember the ceiling tiles sliding past overhead, the fluorescent lights making halos in my vision. The hallway was cold. Someone adjusted my blanket. I tried to say thank you, but my mouth was too dry. The imaging room was loud. The technician's voice came through a speaker telling me to hold still, to breathe in, to hold my breath. The machine whirred and clicked. Then they wheeled me back, and I remember nothing else until late afternoon. When I woke sometime around 4, Nurse Rachel Hughes was checking my vitals. She had kind eyes and a gentle manner, the sort of nurse who called you honey, and meant it. "Welcome back, Mr. Mitchell," she said, wrapping the blood pressure cuff around my arm. "You gave us a little scare this morning. Your oxygen dipped pretty low." I tried to speak. My voice came out as a rasp. "What time is it?" "Almost 4. You've been sleeping most of the day. That's good, your body needs rest." Dr. Samuel Brooks came in a few minutes later, a tall man with silver hair and reading glasses. He reviewed my chart, listened to my lungs, and nodded. "You're responding well to the antibiotics. We'll keep you another night or two just to be safe. But you're on the mend." I felt relieved. The fear that had gripped me that this might be something worse began to ease. Then Brandon and Christine arrived sometime after 4:30. I heard them before I saw them, Christine's heels clicking on the linoleum, Brandon's voice low and uncertain. They appeared in the doorway, and for a moment I felt warmth. My son had come to see me. But something was off. Brandon didn't meet my eyes. He hovered near the foot of the bed, hands in his pockets, while Christine stepped forward with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Dad," Brandon said quietly. "How are you feeling?" "Better. The doctor says I'm improving." Christine glanced at Nurse Rachel. "Excuse me, can you tell us about his condition? Is he lucid? Does he understand what's happening?" Rachel looked surprised. "He's recovering well. He's been sedated, so he's a bit groggy, but that's normal." "But is he lucid?" Christine pressed. "Can he make decisions right now, sign documents?" Rachel's expression shifted, guarded now. "That's not really something I can assess. If you have concerns about his capacity, you'd need to speak with Dr. Brooks." Christine turned to Brandon. "Go find the doctor." Brandon hesitated, glanced at me, then left without a word. I felt uneasy, a prickle of alarm beneath the fog of medication. Why were they asking these questions? Why did Christine care whether I could sign documents? But I was so tired. I told myself they were just worried. Dr. Brooks returned with Brandon within 10 minutes. Christine repeated her questions. Is he competent right now? If he needed to make a decision, a legal decision, could he do that? Dr. Brooks frowned. "Mrs. Mitchell, your father-in-law has been heavily medicated. He's recovering from a serious respiratory infection. I wouldn't recommend that he make any major decisions until he's fully recovered." "But technically he's awake. He can speak." "Technically, yes," Dr. Brooks said slowly. "But that doesn't mean he's in a state to handle complex matters." "I just needed to know," Christine said quickly. She smiled at me. "We're glad you're doing better, Harold. We'll let you rest." They left. I remember lying there as evening approached, staring at the ceiling, feeling a creeping dread I couldn't name. Something was wrong. Something had just happened, and I didn't understand what. Now sitting in my living room with the forged deed in my hands, I understood perfectly. They had come to verify that I was incapacitated. They wanted to know if I could remember anything, if I would be able to testify that I hadn't signed documents that day. And when Dr. Brooks confirmed I was sedated and groggy, they must have felt confident. Confident enough to forge my signature at noon, while I was being wheeled through imaging, barely conscious, unable to protest, or even know what was happening. On Tuesday morning, the 26th of March, I pulled into the parking lot at the Charleston County Courthouse at 100 Broad Street, just as the sun was climbing over the harbor at 8:30. The building was imposing white columns, brick facade, the weight of history pressing down on every step. I was the first person in line when the doors opened at 8:30. Inside, the air was cool and smelled faintly of floor wax. I found the civil division on the second floor and approached the counter. A man in his 50s with wire-rimmed glasses looked up from his computer. "Can I help you? My name is Harold Mitchell. I need to file an emergency motion to stay a writ of possession and vacate a default judgment." He typed into his computer. "Mitchell. Here it is. Mitchell versus Mitchell. Default judgment entered last week. I was never properly served. The address on the return isn't mine. I didn't know about the case until a deputy showed up yesterday morning." The clerk, his nameplate read. Robert Lee studied me, then pulled up more details. He frowned. "The service address is 1240 Ashley River Road. That's not the property address in the complaint." "Exactly. I haven't lived there since 2016. Someone else signed for the papers." Lee leaned back. "You'll need to file a motion to vacate and request an emergency stay. Judge Rhodes is handling unlawful detainers this week." "Judge Margaret Rhodes." "That's right." He gave me a small smile. "She's thorough, very thorough. If you've got evidence that service was improper, she'll want to see it." I felt a flicker of hope. "What do I need to file?" Lee pulled out forms and an instruction sheet. "Fill out the motion to vacate the emergency stay request and attach supporting documents, proof of your actual address, hospital records, anything that shows you weren't properly served. File it here, and we'll assign a hearing date. Given the urgency, probably tomorrow or Thursday." I took the forms, my hands steady. "Thank you." Lee nodded. "Good luck, Mr. Mitchell." I found a wooden bench in the hallway and sat down just before 9 o'clock, spreading the forms across my lap. The courthouse hummed with quiet activity, lawyers hurrying past, people waiting, the distant echo of voices through courtroom doors. I clicked my pen and began to write. I sat on the courthouse bench and began filling out the emergency motion to stay execution of writ of possession, writing slowly and carefully. My handwriting had to be legible. Every word had to be precise. This wasn't just paperwork. This was my home, my life. The truth laid out in black ink on white forms. The motion had sections for the petitioner's statement grounds, for relief supporting facts and requested orders. I started with the basics. My name, the case number, Lee had given me the date of the default judgment. Then I moved to the heart of it, the reasons why that judgment should be vacated. I listed 3 primary grounds. First, improper service of process. The return of service listed 1240 Ashley River Road, an address I had not lived at since 2016. I had never received notice of the lawsuit. I had no opportunity to appear or defend myself. Second, fraudulent acceptance of service. Christine Mitchell. The plaintiff's wife had signed the acknowledgement of receipt on my behalf, without any legal authority to do so. Third, forged quitclaim deed. The deed purporting to transfer ownership of 47 Pitt Street from me to Brandon Mitchell was executed on March 15th, a date when I was hospitalized at MUSC and physically incapable of signing any documents. I wrote it all out in careful, measured sentences. I didn't let anger creep into my tone. I kept it factual, clinical even. The law didn't care about my feelings. It cared about facts. Next came the supporting documents. I pulled out my driver's license, which clearly showed my address as 47 Pitt Street, Charleston, SC 29401. I attached a copy of my most recent utility bill, Charleston Water System, same address, dated 2 weeks ago. I included a copy of the original deed to the property recorded in 1998, when I inherited it from my father's estate. My name was on that deed. It had been on that deed for 27 years. Then I wrote the section about my hospitalization. I stated that from March 14th through March 17th, I had been admitted to MUSC Hospital for treatment of severe pneumonia. I noted that on March 15th, the date the quitclaim deed was allegedly signed and notarized, I had been heavily sedated and undergoing medical imaging. I was not in any condition to sign legal documents, nor had I been presented with any such documents. I requested an emergency hearing before Judge Margaret Rhodes. I asked the court to stay the execution of the writ of possession pending a full hearing on the merits. I requested that the notary Jennifer Blake be ordered to produce her notary journal to verify the circumstances of the alleged signature. I asked that the default judgment be vacated and the fraudulent deed be declared void. At the bottom of the form, I signed my name, my real signature, the one with the slight upward slant at the end, the one I'd been signing for 67 years, not the clumsy forgery on that quitclaim deed. I gathered everything together and walked back to the clerk's counter. Lee looked up as I approached. "All set?" he asked. "I think so." He took the motion and the supporting documents, flipped through them quickly, and nodded. "This looks complete. I'll file it now and get it to Judge Rhodes's clerk this afternoon. You should hear back by tomorrow morning about the hearing date." He stamped the first page with a heavy official-looking stamp that read, "Filed" in bold red letters. The sound echoed a dry, bureaucratic thud that somehow felt satisfying. "Thank you," I said. "You'll get a notice in the mail, but check back here tomorrow just in case. Judge Rhodes moves fast when there's a question of fraud." I left the courthouse just after 9:30 and drove straight to the MUSC Medical Records Office on Ashley Avenue. It was a small, windowless building tucked behind the main hospital complex, the kind of place you'd never notice unless you needed it. Inside, a young woman sat behind a desk piled high with manila folders and file boxes. She looked up when I walked in. "Can I help you?" "I need a complete copy of my medical records from a recent hospital stay," I said. "March 14th through 17th. She pulled out a request form and slid it across the desk. "Fill this out. It usually takes 3 to 5 business days to process." "I don't have 3 to 5 days," I said, keeping my voice calm. "This is for an emergency legal matter. Someone forged my signature while I was hospitalized here, and I need the records to prove I was incapacitated at the time." She blinked. "Oh, let me get my supervisor." She disappeared through a door behind her desk. I stood there staring at the form, feeling the weight of the clock ticking. The writ execution was scheduled for Friday at noon. If I didn't have those records by tomorrow's hearing, I'd have nothing but my word. A woman in her 50s emerged a few minutes later, her expression professional but concerned. "I'm Sandra Coleman, the records manager. I understand you need expedited records." "Yes, ma'am. I was admitted here March 14th for pneumonia. On March 15th, someone forged my signature on a legal document transferring ownership of my home. I need my hospital records, admission notes, sedation logs, imaging schedules, everything to prove I was here and couldn't have signed anything." Coleman studied me for a moment. "This is for a court case." "Yes. Emergency hearing probably tomorrow. I filed a motion this morning." She nodded slowly. "We can expedite this. It'll be $50 for the rush fee, and we'll have the records ready by tomorrow morning at 10 o'clock. Will that work?" "That would work perfectly. Thank you." She handed me the request form. Fill this out completely. Include your signature authorization and a copy of your ID. We'll need a credit card for the fee. I filled out the form right there at the counter, my hand steady despite the exhaustion creeping into my bones. I handed her my driver's license and credit card. She processed everything quickly, her fingers flying across the keyboard. You'll get a call tomorrow morning when the records are ready for pickup, she said, handing back my cards. Just bring your ID. I appreciate this more than you know. She looked at me, and I saw something shift in her expression, sympathy maybe, or recognition of the kind of betrayal I was dealing with. Can I ask who forged your signature? I met her eyes. My son. Her face went still, a flicker of shock crossing it, before she recovered her professional composure. She didn't say anything. What could she say? I turned and walked out. I got home around 5:30 Tuesday evening, exhausted but unable to rest. My mind was still turning over the forms I'd filled out, the records I'd requested, the pieces of evidence I was gathering to prove what Brandon and Christine had done. I dropped my keys on the kitchen counter and was about to sit down when the phone rang. I picked it up on the second ring. Mr. Mitchell? Yes. This is Angela Reeves, judicial assistant to Judge Margaret Rhodes. I'm calling to inform you that the judge has reviewed your emergency motion and supporting documents. My heart started pounding. And Judge Rhodes has granted an immediate stay of execution on the writ of possession. The eviction scheduled for Friday has been suspended pending a full hearing. I closed my eyes and let out a breath I didn't know I'd been holding. Thank you. Thank you so much. The emergency hearing is scheduled for 9 o'clock Thursday morning in courtroom 14, Reeves continued. Both parties have been notified. The plaintiffs were served notice about an hour ago by the sheriff's office. Understood. There was a brief pause, and then she added, Judge Rhodes has expressed concerns about the return of service in this case. She'll want to see all supporting documentation at the hearing. I understood what she was really saying. The judge had already spotted the fraud. She'd seen the fake address, the improper service, and she wasn't buying it. I'll have everything ready, I said. See you Thursday, Mr. Mitchell. I hung up and stood there in my kitchen, staring at the phone. The stay had been granted. I had 2 more days. 2 more days to gather evidence to prepare to fight. Then my phone buzzed with a text message. It was from Brandon. Dad, we need to talk. Please, don't make this harder than it has to be. I stared at the message for a long moment, feeling something twist in my chest. Don't make this harder, as if I were the one who'd forged documents, who'd filed a fraudulent eviction, who'd tried to steal my own father's home. I deleted the message without responding. Wednesday morning at 10 o'clock, I drove back to MUSC to pick up my medical records. Sandra Coleman was waiting for me at the front desk with a thick manila envelope. Everything you requested is in here, she said, handing it over. Admission notes, lab results, medication logs, imaging schedules, nursing notes, physician orders, all of it. I opened the envelope and flipped through the pages. Every single entry was time-stamped. March 15th, 7:15 a.m. Patient transported to radiology. March 15th, 8:30 a.m. CT scan completed. March 15th, 9:45 a.m. Patient returned to room sedated, unresponsive. March 15th, 2 o'clock p.m. Patient remains drowsy, vitals stable. Black and white proof that I had been in that hospital bed, incapacitated, while someone was forging my signature on a deed across town. This is perfect, I said. Thank you. Coleman nodded. Good luck tomorrow. I drove home and spread the records out on my kitchen table, reading through every page. Nurse Rachel Hughes had documented everything in meticulous detail. The medications I'd been given, the times I'd been conscious, the times I'd been out cold. Dr. Brooks's notes confirmed I'd been heavily sedated and in respiratory distress for most of March 15th. At 10:30, my phone rang. It was Charles. "Harold, I've been doing some digging into Brandon's finances like I said I would. And it's not good." Charles's voice was grim. "Your son is in deep trouble. He owes a significant amount of money, 6 figures, to some very unpleasant people." I felt my stomach drop. Gambling. Casino judgments, yes, but also private loans from individuals who don't file paperwork with the courts, if you know what I mean. I knew exactly what he meant. Loan sharks. Dangerous people who didn't mess around when it came to collecting debts. "There's a withdrawal from a joint account he shares with Christine," Charles continued. $25,000 2 months ago. It's labeled loan repayment. $25,000. I thought of my house worth $720,000, enough to wipe out Brandon's debts and then some. "So that's why," I said quietly. "He needed the money." "It looks that way. Whether Christine put him up to it, or whether he came up with the plan himself, I can't say yet. But the motive is clear." I sat down heavily at the kitchen table, staring at the medical records in front of me. My son, my only child, had been so desperate, so drowning in debt, that he'd decided to steal my home, to forge my signature, to evict his own father. "Do you think Christine pushed him into this?" I asked. "Hard to say," Charles said. "She's the one who accepted service at that fake address. She's the one who signed your name on the acknowledgement. She knew exactly what she was doing. Whether Brandon was the mastermind or just a willing accomplice, we'll find out tomorrow. I wanted to believe Brandon had been manipulated. I wanted to believe my son wasn't capable of this level of betrayal on his own. But the facts were the facts. He'd gone to the hospital. He'd asked the nurses and the doctor if I was lucid. He'd verified that I was incapacitated. And then he or Christine, or both of them together, had forged my signature. "What do we do with this information?" I asked. "We present it at the hearing if it becomes relevant," Charles said. "It establishes motive, but our main argument is the fraud itself, the forged deed, the improper service, the fake lease. The debt just explains why they did it." "All right. Get some rest tonight, Harold. Tomorrow's the big day. We're going to prove what they did, and Judge Rhodes is going to throw this case out." "I hope you're right." "I am. I've seen this judge in action. She doesn't tolerate fraud." We hung up, and I sat there in the quiet of my kitchen staring at the photograph on the counter, the one of Brandon at age 10, gap-toothed and grinning at Folly Beach. I wondered where I'd gone wrong. I wondered what I could have done differently to keep my son from becoming the kind of man who would steal from his own father. But I didn't have answers. All I had were the facts, the evidence, and a hearing tomorrow morning at 9 o'clock. I picked up the medical records and the bank documents Charles had emailed me, and I started preparing my case. Wednesday afternoon, after the medical records had arrived that morning, I drove to the Charleston County Recorder's office on Broad Street. I needed to see the forged quitclaim deed with my own eyes, the original document, not just the copy attached to the eviction filing. The office was quiet, just a few people scattered at tables reviewing property records. I approached the front desk where a woman in her 40s with reading glasses on a chain looked up from her computer. "Can I help you?" "I need to view the original deed for 47 Pitt Street. There's a quitclaim deed that was recorded on March 18th. She typed the address into her system. "Let me pull that for you." She disappeared into a back room and returned carrying a document in a protective sleeve. She laid it on the counter. "Here you are. You can review it here, but you can't remove it from the building." "That's fine. Thank you." I stared down at the deed. There it was, my name typed in the grantor field, Brandon Mitchell in the grantee field. The property description, the phrase, "for no monetary consideration," and at the bottom, the signature. I leaned closer, studying it. The letters spelled Harold Mitchell, but the handwriting wasn't quite right. The H was too tall. The downward stroke on the second L was too sharp. Whoever had forged it had tried to mimic my signature, but they'd gotten the pressure wrong. My real signature had a natural flow from 67 years of signing. This one looked traced, hesitant. Then I noticed something else. The notary section. Jennifer Blake's name was printed clearly along with her commission number. But one of the digits in the commission number had been scratched out and corrected, a 7 changed to a 9, or maybe the other way around. It was sloppy. Any competent notary would have voided the document rather than making a correction like that. The woman at the desk. Her nameplate read, "Sarah Coleman was watching me." "Is something wrong?" she asked. "This signature isn't mine, and this notary section has been altered." Her expression shifted. "Oh, I see." She leaned over the counter and looked at the document. "You're right. That correction shouldn't be there. If there's an error in the notary section, the document should be re-executed. Can you help me flag this? I have a court hearing tomorrow. This deed is fraudulent, and I need to protect my property from any further filings." Coleman nodded. "We can place a fraud alert on your parcel. It won't reverse the deed that has to be done through the courts, but it will flag any future attempts to record documents against this property. Please do that." She pulled out a form and began filling it out. I've seen a lot of elder fraud cases. Family members forging signatures, transferring property without consent. This has all the hallmarks. "It's my son," I said. She paused, glanced up at me, then went back to the form without a word. "The fraud alert will be active within the hour," she said when she finished. "You'll get a confirmation letter in the mail, but it's in the system now." "Thank you." I took one more look at the forged deed, memorizing the details, then stepped away from the counter. Sarah Coleman gave me a small, sympathetic nod as I left. That evening, just after 6 o'clock, I called MUSC Hospital and asked to be connected to the nurses' station on the 4th floor. After a few transfers, Nurse Rachel Hughes answered. "This is Rachel." "Rachel, this is Harold Mitchell. I was a patient in room 417 a few weeks ago, pneumonia." "Oh, Mr. Mitchell, I remember you. How are you feeling?" "Much better, thank you. Rachel, I need to ask you something. Do you remember my son and daughter-in-law visiting me on March 15th? There was a pause. "Yes, I do. They asked some unusual questions about your condition, whether you were lucid, whether you could make decisions. It struck me as odd at the time. I'm in the middle of a legal battle. Someone forged my signature on a property deed while I was hospitalized. I need to prove I was incapacitated that day. Would you be willing to testify about what you observed?" "Absolutely," Rachel said without hesitation. I actually made a note about it in my personal log because something felt off. Your son specifically asked if you would remember conversations from that day. I told him you'd been heavily sedated and probably wouldn't retain much. My chest tightened. Brandon had been gathering information. He'd been confirming that I wouldn't be able to challenge what they were about to do. "Would you be able to appear in court tomorrow morning at 9? It's an emergency hearing at the Charleston County Courthouse. I'm off shift tomorrow, so yes, I can be there." "What courtroom?" "Courtroom 14, Judge Margaret Rhodes." "I'll be there, Mr. Mitchell." "Thank you, Rachel. This means more than you know." We hung up, and I felt another piece click into place. Rachel's testimony would corroborate the medical records. She'd been there. She'd witnessed Brandon's questions. She'd documented my condition. That night, just after 11 o'clock, I sat at my kitchen table organizing everything into manila folders. Hospital records, property documents, service papers, bank statements. Each folder was labeled each document in chronological order. On the table beside the folders was a photograph in a wooden frame, Brandon at 8 years old, standing beside me on the pier at Folly Beach, holding up a small flounder he'd caught. He was grinning, gap-toothed, sunburned, proud. I taught him how to bait a hook that day. I taught him how to be patient, how to tie knots. I taught him how to tie his shoes when he was 5. I taught him how to ride a bike when he was 6. I taught him to tell the truth, to work hard, to treat people with respect. Where had I gone wrong? I thought about Elizabeth Beth, my wife who'd passed away 11 years ago. She'd been the strong one, the one who didn't tolerate nonsense from anyone. If she were here now, she wouldn't hesitate. She'd march into that courtroom and demand justice. She wouldn't let anyone take this house, the house we'd raised Brandon, in the house her father had left to us. I picked up a pen and wrote a note to myself on a scrap of paper. This isn't about winning or losing. This is about protecting what's right. I folded the note and slipped it into my jacket pocket. Then I set my alarm for 6 in the morning, turned off the kitchen light, and went to bed. Tomorrow, I would face my son in court. Thursday morning at 8:45, I walked down the courthouse hallway toward courtroom 14, my hand gripping the folder of evidence. My heart was steady. My mind was clear. I'd spent the night preparing for this moment, and I was ready. Charles Donovan stood near the door dressed in a pressed shirt and tie despite his retirement. He gave me a firm nod when he saw me. "Ready?" he asked. "As ready as I'll ever be." Then I saw them. Brandon and Christine were standing 20 feet down the hallway with their attorney, Stephen Pierce. Brandon wore a suit that looked borrowed too tight in the shoulders. He had his hands in his pockets, staring at the floor. Christine stood beside him in a navy dress and heels, her expression cold and composed. Pierce was a young attorney, maybe 35, with slicked back hair and an expensive briefcase. He approached me with a practiced smile. "Mr. Mitchell, I'm Stephen Pierce, counsel for the plaintiffs. I was hoping we could talk before we go in." "About what?" I asked. "Settlement. We can avoid unpleasantness in court if we come to an agreement now. My clients are willing to offer you 6 months to vacate instead of immediate enforcement." I stared at him. "Your clients forged my signature and filed a fraudulent eviction. I'm not settling anything." Pierce's smile faltered. "Mr. Mitchell, with respect, the deed has been recorded. The default judgment has been entered. You're fighting an uphill battle." "Then let's go uphill," I said. Charles stepped forward. "Mr. Pierce, my client has made his position clear. We'll see you inside." Pierce gave a tight nod and walked back to Brandon and Christine. I caught Brandon's eye for just a moment. He looked sick, pale, like he hadn't slept. Then he looked away. At 9 o'clock, sharp bailiff Ronald Price opened the doors. "All rise." The Honorable Judge Margaret Rhodes presiding. We filed in and took our seats. I sat at the respondents' table with Charles beside me. Brandon, Christine, and Pierce sat at the plaintiffs' table across the aisle. Judge Rhodes entered from a side door and took her seat at the bench. She was a woman in her early 60s with short gray hair, sharp eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses, and an expression that said she didn't suffer fools. She looked down at the case file, flipped through a few pages, then looked up. "This is Mitchell versus Mitchell, case number 2025CV04721. Emergency motion to stay execution of writ and vacate default judgment. Mr. Pierce, you represent the plaintiffs." "Yes, Your Honor." "And Mr. Mitchell is representing himself with assistance from Mr. Donovan." "That's correct, Your Honor," Charles said. Judge Rhodes nodded. See, I've reviewed the motion and supporting documents filed by the respondent. I have significant concerns about service of process in this case, and I want to address that first. Pierce shifted in his seat. Your Honor, service was completed in accordance with Mr. Pierce. Judge Rhodes interrupted, her tone sharp. I didn't ask you to explain yet. I will ask questions and you will answer them. Do we understand each other? Yes, Your Honor. She turned her attention to the return of service. Service was executed by substituted service at 1240 Ashley River Road. An adult occupant, Christine Mitchell, accepted service on behalf of Harold Mitchell. She looked up. Mr. Pierce, why was service executed at Ashley River Road when the property in dispute is 47 Pitt Street? Pierce stood. Your Honor, 1240 Ashley River Road was listed as Mr. Mitchell's last known address in our records. What records? Public records, Your Honor. Be specific. Pierce hesitated. Mr. Mitchell resided at that address approximately 10 years ago. Judge Rhodes leaned back. So you're telling me that your clients served an eviction notice for a property on Pitt Street to an address where the respondent lived a decade ago? We believed it to be valid for substituted service, Your Honor. And who accepted service? Christine Mitchell, an adult occupant. An adult occupant who happens to be one of the plaintiffs in this case, Judge Rhodes said slowly. Pierce said nothing. Judge Rhodes turned to me. Mr. Mitchell, do you currently reside at 1240 Ashley River Road? I stood. No, Your Honor. I haven't lived there since 2016. I live at 47 Pitt Street, the property in question. And do you have documentation proving your current address? Yes, Your Honor. I handed Charles my driver's license and utility bill. He walked them to the bench. Judge Rhodes reviewed them carefully. Driver's license issued in 2023, address listed as 47 Pitt Street. Water bill from Charleston Water System dated 3 weeks ago, same address. She looked at Pierce. Mr. Pierce, your clients attempted to evict Mr. Mitchell from a property where he actually lives by serving him at a property where he doesn't live. Does that strike you as proper service? Your Honor, we followed statutory requirements for substituted service when personal service could not be completed. Did you attempt personal service at 47 Pitt Street? Pierce hesitated. I would have to review the process server's logs. You don't know. Not at this moment, Your Honor. Judge Rhodes set the documents down deliberately. Here's what I know, Mr. Pierce. Your clients want to evict Mr. Mitchell from 47 Pitt Street, but instead of serving him there, they served him at an address 10 years out of date where one of the plaintiffs signed for the papers on his behalf. That's not proper service. That's an end run around due process. Pierce opened his mouth to respond, but Judge Rhodes raised a hand. I'm not finished. Now let's talk about this quitclaim deed. She pulled another document from the file. Recorded March 18th, purportedly executed March 15th. Mr. Mitchell, you claim you never signed this deed. I stood again. That's correct, Your Honor. I was hospitalized at MUSC on March 15th for pneumonia. I was sedated and undergoing medical procedures. I could not have signed any document that day. Judge Rhodes looked at Pierce. Do you have evidence that Mr. Mitchell was present at the notary's office on March 15th? The notary's acknowledgement confirms. I asked if you have evidence, Mr. Pierce. A witness, a timestamp, video footage. Pierce fell silent. Judge Rhodes set the deed down with the same deliberate motion. I am very troubled by this return of service. Very troubled. She looked directly at me. Mr. Mitchell, you're stating under oath that you never signed this deed. I stood and addressed the court. Your Honor, regarding the quitclaim deed, I have evidence that proves I could not have signed it. Judge Rhodes looked at me with sharp attention. Proceed, Mr. Mitchell. Charles handed me the thick envelope from MUSC Medical Records. I walked it up to the bench. These are my complete hospital records from March 14th through March 17th. They document every moment of my admission, including my whereabouts and condition, on March 15th, the date the deed was allegedly signed. Judge Rhodes opened the envelope and began reading through the pages. The courtroom fell silent, except for the sound of papers turning. After a few moments, she looked up. According to these records, Mr. Mitchell was admitted to MUSC Hospital on March 14th at 6:45 in the evening with acute pneumonia. He remained hospitalized until discharge on March 17th. She flipped to another page. On March 15th, he was transported to radiology at 7:15 a.m. for imaging studies. CT scan completed at 8:30 a.m. Patient returned to room sedated and unresponsive. She looked at Pierce. Mr. Pierce, the notary acknowledgement on this quitclaim deed states that Harold Mitchell appeared before the notary at her office on March 15th at noon. According to these medical records, Mr. Mitchell was in a hospital bed, heavily sedated at that exact time. Pierce stood slowly. Your Honor, we were not aware of Mr. Mitchell's hospitalization when the deed was executed. Not aware? Judge Rhodes's voice sharpened. Mr. Pierce, there's a visitor log attached to these records. On March 15th at 2:45 p.m., 2 visitors signed in to see Mr. Mitchell in room 417, Brandon Mitchell and Christine Mitchell. The courtroom went completely still. Judge Rhodes continued reading from the visitor log. They spent 20 minutes with him. The nurse's notes from that same time indicate that Mr. Mitchell was drowsy, disoriented, and still recovering from sedation. She looked up at Pierce. So your clients visited Mr. Mitchell in the hospital on the very day they claim he signed a deed at a notary's office. Does that not strike you as suspicious? Pierce's face had gone pale. Your Honor, I don't have an explanation for that discrepancy. No, I imagine you don't. Judge Rhodes set the medical records down and looked at the notary acknowledgement again. The notary on this deed is listed as Jennifer Blake, Commission Number 847392. I want Ms. Blake subpoenaed and brought to this courtroom immediately. Bailiff, contact the sheriff's office. I want her here within the hour. Bailiff Ronald Price nodded and stepped out of the courtroom. Judge Rhodes turned back to Pierce. We're going to take a 30-minute recess while we locate Ms. Blake. When we reconvene, I expect answers about how this deed was notarized, while Mr. Mitchell was physically incapable of signing it. She struck her gavel. Court is in recess. Charles and I stepped out into the hallway. I felt a strange mix of relief and tension relief that the truth was coming out tension about what would happen next. You did well in there, Charles said quietly. The medical records are airtight. There's no way they can explain this away. Across the hallway, Brandon stood with his back against the wall, his face buried in his hands. Christine was on her phone, pacing her expression tight and angry. Pierce stood a few feet away, flipping through documents in his briefcase with increasingly frantic energy. I didn't approach them. There was nothing to say. After 40 minutes, Bailiff Price returned and announced that court would reconvene. We filed back into the courtroom. A few moments later, a woman in her late 30s entered through the side door escorted by a deputy. She looked terrified. Ms. Jennifer Blake, Judge Rhodes asked. Yes, Your Honor. Her voice was shaky. You are a notary public licensed in the state of South Carolina. Yes, Your Honor. Did you notarize a quitclaim deed for Harold Mitchell on March 15th of this year? Blake hesitated. I notarized a deed, yes. Was Harold Mitchell physically present before you when you notarized it? Blake's eyes darted toward Brandon and Christine. She swallowed hard. I believed he was. You believed he was? Judge Rhodes leaned forward. Ms. Blake, as a notary, you are required to verify the identity of the person signing a document. Did you verify Harold Mitchell's identity? I was shown an ID. By whom? Another hesitation. By the man who brought the document to me. And who was that man? Blake's voice dropped to barely a whisper. Brandon Mitchell. Judge Rhodes's expression hardened. So Brandon Mitchell brought you a document, showed you an ID that he claimed belonged to his father, and you notarized it without Harold Mitchell being present. He said his father couldn't come in person because he was sick. He showed me a power of attorney. A power of attorney! Judge Rhodes's voice was ice cold. Ms. Blake, do you have a copy of this alleged power of attorney? Blake shook her head miserably. No, Your Honor. He just showed it to me. I didn't keep a copy. So you notarized a deed transferring ownership of a $720,000 property based on a document you didn't retain presented by the beneficiary of that transfer without the grantor being present. Is that your testimony? Blake looked like she might cry. Yes, Your Honor. Judge Rhodes turned to the court reporter. Let the record reflect that the notary has admitted that Harold Mitchell was not present when the deed was notarized. She looked back at Blake. Ms. Blake, do you maintain a notary journal as required by law? Yes, Your Honor. Blake reached into her purse with trembling hands and pulled out a small bound notebook. She handed it to the bailiff, who brought it to the bench. Judge Rhodes opened the journal and flipped to the relevant date. She read silently for a moment, then looked up. According to your journal, Ms. Blake, the notarization took place on March 15th at 12 noon. The location is listed as... She paused, reading more carefully. Room 417 MUSC. The courtroom erupted in murmurs. Judge Rhodes struck her gavel once. Ms. Blake, she said, her voice now dangerously quiet. Room 417 at MUSC is a hospital room, isn't it? Blake's face crumbled. I don't know, I didn't go there. Brandon gave me the information to write down. I watched Judge Rhodes examine every line in the notary journal, her expression growing harder with each passing moment. She looked up at Jennifer Blake, her eyes sharp. Ms. Blake, according to your journal, you verified Harold Mitchell's identity using his driver's license. Can you tell me the license number you recorded? Blake's hands trembled as she leaned forward to look at the journal. It ends in 931, Your Honor. Judge Rhodes turned to me. Mr. Mitchell, what is your actual driver's license number? I pulled out my wallet and handed my license to the bailiff, who brought it to the bench. Judge Rhodes compared it to the journal entry. The actual license number ends in 617, not 931, she said slowly. Miss Blake, how do you explain this discrepancy? Blake's voice was barely audible. I may have written it down wrong. I was looking at a photocopy and the image quality. You may have written it wrong, Judge Rhodes interrupted. You falsified a notarization for a property worth $720,000, and you can't even get the identification number correct. Blake said nothing. There was nothing she could say. Judge Rhodes set the journal down and turned her attention to the broader picture. Let's talk about motive. Mr. Mitchell, you mentioned in your motion that you believe there was a financial motive behind this fraud. Do you have evidence of that? I nodded to Charles, who stood and approached the bench with a folder. Your Honor, we have financial records obtained through discovery that show the plaintiff, Brandon Mitchell's financial situation at the time the deed was executed. Judge Rhodes took the folder and began reviewing the documents. Her eyebrows rose slightly. Mr. Pierce, she said without looking up, were you aware that your client owed substantial gambling debts? Pierce stood quickly. Your Honor, I don't see how my client's personal financial situation is relevant to— It's relevant because it establishes motive, Judge Rhodes said sharply. Sit down, Mr. Pierce. Pierce sat. Judge Rhodes looked at Brandon. Mr. Mitchell, Brandon Mitchell, please stand. Brandon stood slowly, his face pale. According to these financial records, Judge Rhodes said, reading from the documents, you owe a total of $180,000 in gambling debts. There are 3 civil judgments against you from casinos. There are also multiple withdrawals from high-interest personal loans, commonly known as payday loans. 2 months before you filed this eviction, you withdrew $25,000 from a joint account with your wife and labeled it loan repayment. The courtroom was silent except for Brandon's ragged breathing. Judge Rhodes continued, her voice cold and precise. So you needed money. You were desperate, and your father's house worth $720,000 would solve that problem, wouldn't it? Brandon's voice cracked. Your Honor, I was scared. The people I owed money to were threatening my family. They said if I didn't pay, they'd what? Judge Rhodes demanded. They'd hurt us, Brandon whispered. Christine said this was the only way. She said Dad was going to lose the house to medical bills anyway, and if we didn't act fast, we'd lose everything. Brandon, shut up, Christine hissed from beside him. Judge Rhodes's gavel came down hard. Mrs. Mitchell, you will not speak unless I ask you a direct question. Do you understand me? Christine's jaw clenched, but she nodded. Judge Rhodes turned back to Brandon. So your wife told you to forge your father's signature and steal his house to pay your gambling debts? She said it wasn't stealing. Brandon said, his voice breaking. She said it was going to be mine eventually anyway, and this way we could save it from the hospital. She said— He stopped, his shoulders shaking. She said what? Judge Rhodes pressed. She said Dad would understand, that he'd want to help me. I felt something twist in my chest. My son actually believed that. He actually thought I would understand him forging my signature and stealing my home while I was sedated in a hospital bed. Judge Rhodes set the financial records down. Let me make sure I understand the timeline here. You owed $180,000. You were being threatened by creditors. Your wife suggested stealing your father's house. You went to the hospital on March 15th and verified that he was incapacitated and wouldn't remember anything. Then you or your wife forged his signature on a quitclaim deed, paid a notary $3,500 to falsify the notarization, and recorded the fraudulent deed. Is that correct? Brandon didn't answer. He just stood there, tears streaming down his face. I asked you a question, Mr. Mitchell. Yes, Brandon whispered. Yes, Your Honor. That's what happened. Judge Rhodes looked at Christine. And you, Mrs. Mitchell, were you the architect of this scheme? Christine's face was stone. She said nothing. Judge Rhodes turned back to Jennifer Blake. Ms. Blake, I'm going to ask you one more time, and I want a clear answer. Did you personally witness Harold Mitchell sign this quitclaim deed, yes or no? Blake's face crumbled. She opened her mouth to speak, and suddenly Christine stood up. Your Honor, Christine said, her voice loud and clear. I'd like to say something. Stephen Pierce grabbed her arm. Christine, don't. She shook him off. I want to speak. Judge Rhodes looked at her with cold curiosity. You want to speak, Mrs. Mitchell, very well. Proceed. Christine took a breath, and I saw something shift in her expression, a calculation, a decision made. She was going to try to control the narrative one more time. Your Honor, my husband is telling the truth about the gambling debts. He was desperate. He was terrified. But he's not telling you the whole story. Brandon's head snapped toward her. Christine, what are you? He came to me with the plan. Christine said, her voice steady. He said his father was going to die soon anyway. He had terminal cancer, and we needed to get the house before it was eaten up by medical bills. He asked me to help him. He begged me. That's a lie, Brandon shouted. You showed me the fake diagnosis. You said Dad was dying. Your Honor. Christine continued, ignoring Brandon. I went along with it because I was trying to support my husband. I didn't know it was illegal. I thought we were just... Stop. Judge Rhodes said, her voice cutting through the courtroom like a knife. Christine fell silent. Judge Rhodes leaned forward, her eyes fixed on Christine. Mrs. Mitchell, you just committed perjury in my courtroom. And more importantly, you just confirmed that you were a willing participant in this fraud. She turned to Jennifer Blake. Ms. Blake, I'll ask you one final time. Did you see Harold Mitchell sign this deed with your own eyes, yes or no? Blake's voice was barely a whisper. No, Your Honor. I didn't. I watched Christine stand up, ignoring the urgent hand Stephen Pierce placed on her arm, trying to stop her. Your Honor, Christine said, her voice tight and controlled. I need to clarify something. My husband was desperate. He was the one who came up with this plan. He pressured me into going along with it. The courtroom went silent. Brandon's head snapped up, his face draining of color. What? Brandon said, his voice barely above a whisper. What are you doing? Christine didn't look at him. She kept her eyes on Judge Rhodes. Brandon owed a substantial amount of money to dangerous people. He was terrified. He told me we had no choice, that his father was going to die soon anyway, and we needed to secure the house before it went into probate. Brandon stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. You're lying. That's not Christine. Stop. He forged the signature. Christine continued, her voice rising. He brought the deed to the notary. He told me to sign for the service at the old address because his father wouldn't answer the door at Pitt Street. I didn't know it was illegal. I thought we were just... You brought me the fake doctor's letters, Brandon shouted, his voice cracking. You told me Dad had 6 months to live. You showed me paperwork from his oncologist saying he had terminal cancer. Judge Rhodes struck her gavel hard. Order both of you sit down and be quiet, or I will have you removed from this courtroom. Brandon sank back into his chair, shaking. Christine remained standing, her jaw set. Pierce stood slowly, his face pale. Your Honor, I need to request a recess. I was not aware of these allegations between my clients, and I believe there may be a conflict of interest that prevents me from continuing to represent both parties. Judge Rhodes looked at him with something close to disgust. Mr. Pierce, were you aware that your clients had fabricated evidence and committed fraud when you filed this case? Absolutely not, Your Honor. I was given documentation that I believed to be legitimate. If I had known, then you're either incompetent or complicit. Judge Rhodes said coldly. Either way, I'm granting your request to withdraw. You are dismissed from this case, Mr. Pierce. Your clients can represent themselves or find new counsel. Pierce gathered his papers quickly, his hands shaking. He didn't look at Brandon or Christine as he walked out of the courtroom. Brandon and Christine sat alone at the plaintiff's table, now no longer a united front. Brandon had his head in his hands. Christine sat rigid, staring straight ahead. Judge Rhodes turned her attention back to Jennifer Blake, who was still standing near the witness stand, her face streaked with tears. Ms. Blake, Judge Rhodes said, her voice sharp. I want the truth. All of it. Was Harold Mitchell present when you notarized that deed? Blake shook her head, sobbing. No. No, he wasn't. Then what happened? Blake took a shuddering breath. Christine Mitchell came to my office on March 18th. She had the deed already signed, or I thought it was signed. She showed me a photocopy of Harold Mitchell's driver's license. She said he was in the hospital and couldn't come in person, but that he'd signed the deed and just needed it notarized. And you believed her. She offered me $3,500. Blake said, her voice breaking. Cash. She said it was urgent, that they needed it recorded immediately. My daughter was in the hospital. She needed surgery we couldn't afford. I knew it was wrong, but I took the money. I backdated the notarization to March 15th because that's what Christine told me to write. Judge Rhodes's expression was ice. So you falsified a notary acknowledgement, falsified your journal entry, and accepted a bribe to notarize a document without verifying the identity of the signer. Yes, Blake whispered. Yes, Your Honor. I'm so sorry. Your apology is worthless, Miss Blake. Judge Rhodes turned to the bailiff. Bailiff Price, contact the Secretary of State's office immediately. Ms. Blake's notary commission is suspended effective immediately, and she is to be detained pending criminal charges for notary fraud and conspiracy to commit fraud. Blake collapsed into her chair, crying openly. Judge Rhodes turned back to Brandon and Christine. Let me be very clear about what I've heard today. Christine Mitchell, you bribed a notary to falsify documents. Brandon Mitchell, you forged your father's signature and orchestrated a scheme to steal his home. You both visited him in the hospital while he was sedated to verify that he wouldn't remember what you were doing. You both filed a fraudulent eviction lawsuit based on a forged deed. Christine finally spoke, her voice cold. We needed the money. Harold was going to lose the house anyway. The hospital bills were mine to worry about. I said, my voice cutting through the courtroom. Not yours. That house was never yours to take. Christine turned to look at me for the first time, and I saw no remorse in her eyes, only anger that her plan had failed. Brandon, on the other hand, looked destroyed. He was staring at the table in front of him, tears streaming down his face. Judge Rhodes looked at both of them with undisguised contempt. I've heard enough, she said. Christine just betrayed Brandon in open court, and the notary confessed. But I wasn't done. I had one more witness whose testimony would expose the real crime. If you're still here, comment your reaction to Christine's lies below. Quick note, this story includes fictionalized elements for impact. Now about Nurse Rachel Hughes. Before Judge Rhodes could continue, I stood. Your Honor, I have one more witness I'd like to call. Judge Rhodes looked at me with curiosity. Proceed, Mr. Mitchell. Charles opened the courtroom door and gestured to someone in the hallway. A moment later, Nurse Rachel Hughes entered, wearing her hospital scrubs under a cardigan. She looked nervous but determined. Your Honor, this is Rachel Hughes, I said. She was my nurse at MUSC on March 15th. She has direct knowledge of my son's behavior that day. Judge Rhodes nodded. Ms. Hughes, please approach the witness stand. Rachel walked forward and was sworn in by the court clerk. She sat down, her hands folded in her lap. Ms. Hughes, Judge Rhodes said you were Mr. Mitchell's nurse on March 15th. Yes, Your Honor. I was assigned to him during the day shift, 7 a.m. to 7 p.m. And do you recall Brandon Mitchell and Christine Mitchell visiting the patient that day? Yes, I do. They arrived around 2:45 in the afternoon. Judge Rhodes leaned forward slightly. Can you describe what happened during that visit? Rachel took a breath. Mr. Mitchell was still very drowsy from the sedation he'd been given for his CT scan that morning. He was awake but disoriented. The visitors, Brandon and Christine, seemed more interested in talking to me than talking to him. What did they ask you? Brandon asked me several questions about Mr. Mitchell's condition. He asked if his father was lucid, if he understood what was happening around him. Then he asked something that struck me as odd at the time. What was that? Rachel glanced at Brandon, then back at the judge. He said, if my father signed something today, would he remember it? The courtroom went completely still. Judge Rhodes's expression hardened. He asked you if his father would remember signing something. Yes, Your Honor. Those were his exact words. And what did you tell him? I told him that Mr. Mitchell had been heavily sedated all morning for imaging procedures and wouldn't likely remember much of anything that happened before 3 o'clock in the afternoon. He'd been given Versed and fentanyl, which caused short-term memory loss. And how did Brandon Mitchell react to that information? Rachel hesitated, then said quietly, he looked relieved. He glanced at Christine and she smiled. Then they thanked me and went into the room to see Mr. Mitchell for about 10 minutes before leaving. Judge Rhodes sat back in her chair, her jaw tight. Ms. Hughes, did you make any notes about this interaction? Yes, Your Honor. It bothered me enough that I wrote it down in my personal log that evening. I thought it was strange that a son would be asking about his father's ability to remember things, rather than just asking about his medical condition. Do you have that log with you? Rachel reached into her bag and pulled out a small spiral notebook. I brought it, yes. I wasn't sure if you'd want to see it. Judge Rhodes gestured to the bailiff who brought the notebook to the bench. Judge Rhodes flipped through it, found the relevant entry, and read aloud. March 15th, 2:50 p.m. Patient's son asked unusual question about father's memory and ability to recall signing documents. Advised patient heavily sedated and unlikely to retain memories from morning. Son appeared satisfied with this answer. Noted for record in case of future questions about patient capacity. Judge Rhodes closed the notebook slowly and looked at Brandon. Mr. Mitchell, you went to the hospital to verify that your father was incapacitated. You specifically asked a nurse if he would remember signing something, and when you were told he wouldn't, you proceeded with your plan to forge his signature on a deed. Brandon's face was chalk white. He opened his mouth, but no words came out. Christine stood abruptly. Your Honor, we were just trying to understand his condition. We were worried. Sit down, Mrs. Mitchell. Judge Rhodes said, her voice like steel. Christine sat. Judge Rhodes turned back to Rachel. Ms. Hughes, in your professional opinion as a nurse with access to Mr. Mitchell's medical records and direct observation of his condition, on March 15th, was he capable of signing legal documents that day? Absolutely not, Rachel said without hesitation. He was heavily sedated, disoriented, and in and out of consciousness. I would never have advised anyone to have him sign anything that required mental capacity. Thank you, Ms. Hughes. You may step down. Rachel left the witness stand and took a seat in the gallery. I gave her a small nod of gratitude as she passed. Judge Rhodes turned her full attention to Brandon and Christine. Her expression was one of barely controlled fury. Well, let me make sure I understand what happened here, she said, her voice cold and precise. On March 15th, Harold Mitchell was hospitalized and heavily sedated. You, Brandon Mitchell, and you, Christine Mitchell, visited him in the hospital. You specifically asked his nurse if he would remember signing documents. When you were told he would not, you left the hospital and proceeded to forge his signature on a quitclaim deed transferring ownership of his home to yourselves. You then bribed a notary to backdate the notarization and falsify her records to make it appear that Mr. Mitchell had been present. You recorded the fraudulent deed, and then you filed an eviction lawsuit against your own father, serving him at a fake address to ensure he wouldn't receive notice. Brandon was crying openly now, his shoulders shaking. Christine's face was stone. This is not ordinary fraud, Judge Rhodes continued. This is premeditated elder abuse. You exploited your father's hospitalization. You verified his incapacity and used it to your advantage. You conspired to steal his home while he was at his most vulnerable. She paused, letting the weight of her words settle over the courtroom. I've been a judge for 23 years, she said. I've seen fraud cases, forgery cases, family disputes over property. But I have never seen a case this calculated, this cruel. She looked directly at Brandon and Christine, and I saw in her expression that everything was over. This isn't just fraud, she said. This is elder abuse with premeditation. This is a crime. Judge Rhodes closed the case file and looked out across the courtroom. I held my breath. I'm ready to issue my ruling, she said. The courtroom was silent except for the faint hum of the air conditioning and the sound of Brandon's quiet, ragged breathing. Judge Rhodes looked directly at me. Mr. Mitchell, based on the evidence presented today, the medical records, the visitor logs, the testimony of Nurse Hughes, the admission by the notary, and the clear discrepancies in the service of process, I find that you were never properly served with notice of this lawsuit. The default judgment entered against you is void for lack of proper service. I felt something loosen in my chest. Furthermore, Judge Rhodes continued, the quitclaim deed recorded on March 18th purporting to transfer ownership of 47 Pitt Street from you to Brandon Mitchell is fraudulent. It was forged while you were hospitalized and incapacitated. The notarization was falsified. The deed is void ab initio, void from the beginning. It has no legal effect whatsoever. She picked up her pen and began writing on the order in front of her. The stay of execution on the writ of possession is made permanent. The writ itself is vacated. The default judgment is vacated. The quitclaim deed is declared null and void. Harold Mitchell retains full and sole ownership of the property located at 47 Pitt Street, Charleston, South Carolina. I closed my eyes for a moment, letting the words sink in. I had won. The house was still mine, but Judge Rhodes wasn't finished. Now as to the criminal conduct that has been revealed in this courtroom today. Her voice hardened. I am referring this matter to the Charleston County District Attorney's Office for immediate investigation and prosecution. The evidence shows conspiracy to commit fraud, forgery, elder abuse, perjury, and notary fraud. These are serious crimes, and I will ensure that they are prosecuted to the fullest extent of the law. She looked at Brandon and Christine. You are both prohibited from leaving Charleston County pending the completion of the criminal investigation. If you attempt to leave, you will be arrested and held without bond. Christine's face went pale. Brandon didn't move. Judge Rhodes turned to me. Mr. Mitchell, I strongly advise you to file for a restraining order against both of these individuals immediately. You can do so at the clerk's office downstairs. Given what they've attempted to do, I consider them a danger to your safety and well-being. I will, Your Honor, I said quietly. Judge Rhodes leaned forward, her gaze fixed on Brandon. Mr. Mitchell, Brandon Mitchell, I want you to understand something. You had a father who raised you, who gave you a home, who loved you, and when he was at his weakest, lying in a hospital bed, struggling to breathe, you went to that hospital and verified that he was too sedated to remember what you were about to do. Then you forged his signature, stole his home, and tried to throw him out onto the street. Brandon's shoulders shook. He kept his head down, unable to meet her eyes. The betrayal of exploiting your father's weakness while he was hospitalized is beyond words. Judge Rhodes set her voice cold with contempt. You didn't just commit fraud. You committed a profound moral crime against the man who gave you life. She turned to Christine. And you, Mrs. Mitchell, were the architect of this scheme. You bribed the notary. You forged the service. You manipulated your husband into this course of action. You showed no remorse even when confronted with the evidence. You are, in my view, the more culpable of the two." Christine said nothing. Her jaw was set, her eyes fixed straight ahead. Judge Rhodes picked up her gavel. "This court is adjourned. Mr. Mitchell, your home is yours. The fraudulent deed is void. The eviction is dismissed. Bailiff, please escort the plaintiffs out of the courtroom and ensure they understand the travel restriction." She struck the gavel, once a sharp crack that echoed through the room. "All rise," Bailiff Price said. Everyone stood as Judge Rhodes left the bench. As soon as she was gone, the courtroom erupted in movement. Court staff gathered papers. People in the gallery began filing out. Brandon sat motionless at the plaintiff's table, his face buried in his hands. Christine stood and walked toward the door without looking back at him. Charles put a hand on my shoulder. "You did it, Harold. The house is yours." "I know," I said quietly. But I didn't feel victorious. I felt hollow. I gathered my folders and stood. As I turned to leave, Brandon looked up at me. His face was streaked with tears, his eyes red and swollen. "Dad," he said, his voice breaking. "Dad, I'm sorry. I'm so sorry." I looked at my son, the boy I'd taught to ride a bike, the boy I'd taken fishing at Folly Beach, the boy I'd raised to be honest and kind, and I felt nothing but grief. "I know you are Brandon," I said, "but it doesn't change what you did." I walked out of the courtroom with my folders tucked under my arm. Charles followed a few steps behind. Outside, the Charleston sun was bright and warm. The air smelled like salt from the harbor. People walked past on the sidewalk, going about their lives, unaware of what had just happened inside that courtroom. I had won. I had kept my house. But I had lost my only son. I walked out of the courthouse and sat down heavily on the concrete steps, unable to take another step. My legs felt weak. My chest felt tight. I had won, but the victory tasted like ash. Charles sat down beside me. "Are you all right?" "I don't know," I said honestly. People streamed past us, lawyers, clerks, other litigants heading to their own hearings. A few glanced at me curiously. One woman, a reporter, judging by the notebook in her hand, approached and asked if I'd be willing to comment on the case. "No," I said quietly. "No comment." She lingered for a moment, then moved on. Charles and I sat in silence for a few minutes. Finally, he said, "You should go home. Get some rest. I'll file the restraining order paperwork this afternoon and bring it by for your signature tonight." "Thank you, Charles." "Don't thank me yet. This isn't over. The DA's office will want to interview you. There will be a criminal investigation. It's going to be a long process." "I know." I stood slowly, feeling every one of my 67 years, and walked to my car. The drive home took 15 minutes. I pulled into the driveway at 47 Pitt Street and sat there for a moment, looking at the house. My house. The house I'd lived in for 27 years. The house I'd raised Brandon in. The house I'd almost lost. I got out of the car and walked toward the front door. That's when I saw Brandon's car parked across the street. My stomach dropped. Before I could react, Christine stepped out of the passenger side and started walking toward me. She was alone. Brandon wasn't with her. "Harold," she called out. "Wait. I need to talk to you." I stopped on the front steps, my hand on the doorknob. "There's nothing to talk about, Christine." She crossed the street and stopped at the edge of my lawn, just close enough to speak, but far enough to stay off my property. She looked composed, her expression calm and almost sympathetic. "I know you're angry," she said. "I understand. But I need you to think about Brandon." "I have been thinking about Brandon," I said coldly. I've been thinking about how my son tried to steal my house. He made a mistake, Christine said quickly. A terrible mistake. But he's your son, Harold, your only child. Do you really want to see him go to prison? I stared at her. That's not my decision. Judge Rhodes referred this to the DA. But it is your decision, Christine pressed. The DA won't pursue charges if you refuse to cooperate. If you tell them you don't want to press charges, if you say you've worked it out as a family matter, they'll drop it. I felt anger rising in my chest. You want me to let him get away with what he did? I want you to protect your son. Christine said, her tone turning sharp. He's drowning Harold. He owes money to dangerous people. If he goes to prison, they'll come after him. He won't survive it. Then he should have thought of that before he forged my signature. Christine's expression hardened. You're a selfish old man. You're sitting in a house worth $750,000 while your son is about to lose everything. You could help him, but you won't. Help him, I said, my voice rising. I've been helping him his entire life. I gave him a home. I paid for his education. I bailed him out of trouble more times than I can count. And this is how he repays me, by stealing from me. He's your son. Christine repeated, her voice cold now. He's your blood. And when you're lying in this house all alone, dying with no one who cares about you, you'll regret this. You'll regret choosing this house over your family. I looked at her, really looked at her, and I saw it clearly for the first time. She wasn't here to apologize. She wasn't here to make amends. She was here to manipulate me, to guilt me, to control the situation one more time. Get off my property, I said quietly. Christine's mask slipped. Her face twisted with anger. You'll regret this, old man. When you're lying here dead and alone in this house, you'll regret it. No one's going to visit you. No one's going to care. You'll die alone, and it'll be your own fault. I pulled out my phone and dialed Charles's number. He answered on the second ring. Charles. I said, my voice steady. I need you to help me file for a restraining order today, right now. Christine just threatened me at my house. Christine's eyes widened. She took a step back. What did she say? Charles asked. She told me I'll regret this when I'm dying alone in my house. She's standing on my lawn right now. I'm calling the sheriff's office, Charles said. Stay on the line with me. Don't engage with her. Christine turned and walked quickly back to the car. She got in, and Brandon's car pulled away from the curb and disappeared down the street. I stood there on my front steps, phone still pressed to my ear, watching the car disappear. Are you all right? Charles asked. I'm fine, I said. But I want that restraining order filed today. I'm on my way to your house now. We'll do it together. I hung up and went inside, locking the door behind me. Friday afternoon. Charles met me at the courthouse to file for an emergency restraining order. We sat in a small office on the third floor, filling out the forms while Charles explained each section. You need to document everything Christine said to you yesterday. He told me. Every threat, every word you can remember. I wrote it all down. The manipulation attempt, the guilt trip, the threat about dying alone. Charles read it over, nodded, and walked the paperwork to the clerk's office. 2 hours later, we appeared before a magistrate judge. I repeated my statement under oath. The judge asked a few clarifying questions, then signed the order. This restraining order is effective immediately, the judge said. Brandon Mitchell and Christine Mitchell are prohibited from coming within 500 feet of you or your property. If they violate this order, they will be arrested and held in contempt of court. The sheriff's office served the order that evening. I got a call from the deputy confirming that both Brandon and Christine had been notified. That night, I hired a locksmith to change every lock in the house. The front door, the back door, the side gate, everything. I also called a security company and had cameras installed at the front entrance, the driveway, and the back porch. If anyone came near my property, I would know. I didn't sleep well that night. Every sound made me jump. Every car that drove past made me wonder if it was them. Monday morning, April 1st, my phone rang at 9 o'clock. I didn't recognize the number, but I answered anyway. Mr. Mitchell, this is Detective Patricia Warren from the Charleston County District Attorney's Office. I'm calling about the case that was referred to us by Judge Rhodes last week. Yes, I said. I've been expecting your call. I'd like to come by and take your statement this afternoon if you're available. This is a priority case and we want to move quickly. I'm available. I'll be there at 2 o'clock. Detective Warren arrived exactly on time. She was a woman in her 40s with short dark hair and a no-nonsense demeanor. She wore a badge on her belt and carried a digital recorder. We sat at my kitchen table and she placed the recorder between us. I'm going to record this interview for documentation purposes, she said. Is that all right with you? That's fine. She pressed record and stated her name, my name, the date, and the case number. Then she looked at me. Mr. Mitchell, I've reviewed the court transcript from last Thursday's hearing. I've also reviewed the evidence you submitted, the medical records, the forged deed, the notary's confession. I want to walk through the timeline with you and get your account of what happened. For the next hour, I told her everything. The morning the deputy showed up, the discovery of the fake service address, the forged deed, the hospital visit where Brandon asked if I would remember signing something, Christine's manipulation attempt at my house. Detective Warren took notes and asked clarifying questions. She was thorough, precise, and respectful. When I finished, she set down her pen and looked at me seriously. Mr. Mitchell, based on what I've reviewed, we're looking at multiple felony charges: forgery in the first degree, conspiracy to commit fraud, elder abuse under South Carolina law, notary fraud. These are serious crimes with serious consequences. What kind of consequences? I asked. Brandon and Christine could each face several years in prison if convicted. Jennifer Blake, the notary, will likely face jail time and the permanent loss of her notary commission. I felt a heaviness settle over me. Prison. My son could go to prison. Detective Warren seemed to sense my hesitation. I know this is difficult, she said quietly. He's your son. But what he did was not a mistake. It was calculated, premeditated elder abuse. He exploited your vulnerability to steal your home. I know, I said, but I still don't want to see him destroyed. Warren nodded. I understand. And I'll be honest with you, we believe Christine was the primary architect of this scheme. She bribed the notary. She orchestrated the fake service. She manipulated Brandon into participating. If Brandon is willing to cooperate and testify against her, we may be able to offer him a reduced sentence. A reduced sentence, I repeated. He would still face charges, Warren said. But cooperation could make a difference. It would also give us a stronger case against Christine, who we believe is the more culpable party. I thought about Brandon sitting in that courtroom crying, saying he was sorry. I thought about Christine standing on my lawn threatening me, showing no remorse at all. What do you need from me? I asked. We need your full cooperation, testimony at trial if it comes to that, access to any additional evidence you might have. And we need you to be honest about what happened, even if it's painful. I can do that, I said. Warren turned off the recorder and packed up her notes. We'll be in touch within the next few weeks as the investigation progresses. In the meantime, if Brandon or Christine try to contact you, do not engage with them. Call me immediately. She handed me her business card, with her direct number. "One more thing," she said as she stood to leave. "You did the right thing, Mr. Mitchell. Not just for yourself, but for every other elderly person who might have been victimized by people like Christine. Cases like this need to be prosecuted." I walked her to the door and watched her drive away. Then I sat down at my kitchen table and stared at the photograph of Brandon at Folly Beach, the one where he was 8 years old and holding up a fish. I wondered if he would ever forgive me. I wondered if I would ever forgive him. 2 weeks later, on a Wednesday morning, Detective Warren called me with news from the search warrant execution at Brandon and Christine's apartment. "Mr. Mitchell, we need to talk. Can I come by this afternoon?" "Of course," I said. She arrived at 2 o'clock carrying a file folder. We sat at the kitchen table again, and she opened the folder without preamble. "We executed a search warrant at Brandon and Christine's residence yesterday," she said. "We found some things you need to know about." I braced myself. Warren pulled out a document and slid it across the table. "Divorce papers, filed and prepared by Christine Mitchell 3 weeks before the eviction attempt. They were hidden in a lockbox in her closet." I stared at the document. The date jumped out at me, February 22nd, 3 weeks before the deputy showed up at my door. "She was planning to divorce him?" I asked. "Yes, and here's where it gets worse." Warren pulled out another document. "Hasitian. This is a property settlement agreement, drafted by Christine's attorney. According to this document, Christine would receive the house at 47 Pitt Street, valued at $720,000, as part of the divorce settlement. Brandon would receive nothing." My stomach turned. "She was going to take everything," I said quietly. "That's exactly what she was planning," Warren confirmed. "She manipulated Brandon into committing fraud, forging your signature, and stealing your house. Then she was going to divorce him, take the house for herself, and leave him with nothing but $180,000 in gambling debt." I sat back in my chair, trying to process what I was hearing. "Brandon had no idea," Warren continued. "When we showed him these documents yesterday, he fell apart completely. He's been cooperative since the beginning, but now he's willing to testify against Christine without any deals or promises. He wants her prosecuted for what she did to him and to you." I thought about Brandon crying in the courtroom, the way he'd looked at Christine when she tried to throw him under the bus. He'd been manipulated just like I had. "There's something else," Warren said, her expression darkening. She pulled out another document. "This is a beneficiary change form for your life insurance policy. $500,000. The original beneficiary was Brandon. The new beneficiary, according to this form, is Christine Mitchell." I stared at the paper. My signature was at the bottom, except it wasn't my signature. "She forged this?" I asked. "Yes. She filed it with your insurance company in February, around the same time she was preparing the divorce papers. The insurance company accepted it without question, because the signature looked close enough." A cold horror settled over me. "She was betting on me dying," I said slowly. Warren nodded. "Hakilai. We believe Christine's plan was to evict you from your home, cause you significant stress, and wait for your health to fail. You were already hospitalized with pneumonia. If the eviction had gone through, the stress of losing your home combined with your medical condition could have led to another health crisis. If you had died within the next year or two, Christine would have collected $500,000 in life insurance on top of the house." I felt sick. "She wasn't just stealing my home," I said. "She was hoping I would die so she could collect the insurance." "That's what the evidence suggests," Warren said. "We're adding insurance fraud and attempted financial exploitation to the charges. This goes beyond simple property fraud, Mr. Mitchell. This was a plan to exploit your health, your vulnerability, and your eventual death for financial gain." I couldn't speak. I just sat there staring at the forged insurance document. Warren let me sit in silence for a moment, then said gently, "I know this is a lot to take in, but I want you to know Brandon is devastated. When we showed him the divorce papers and the insurance beneficiary change, he broke down. He said he had no idea Christine was planning any of this. He thought they were doing it together to pay off his debts and start over." "He was a fool," I said quietly. "He was," Warren agreed. "But he was also a victim. Christine manipulated him, exploited his desperation, and planned to betray him the moment she got what she wanted. She gathered the documents and put them back in the folder. 'Brandon wants to see you,' she said. 'He's asked if you would be willing to meet with him.' I told him I'd pass along the message, but that it was entirely up to you." I shook my head. "I'm not ready." "I understand. If you change your mind, let me know." Warren stood to leave. "We're moving forward with the prosecution. Christine will be arrested and formally charged within the next week. Brandon will be charged as well, but we're offering him a plea deal in exchange for his testimony. If he accepts it, he'll serve probation instead of prison time. And Christine, she's looking at significant prison time if convicted. 5 to 10 years, possibly more." Warren left and I sat alone at the kitchen table for a long time. Then I walked out onto the front porch and sat down on the steps looking at the oak tree my father had planted 50 years ago. The tree that had shaded this house for decades. The tree that had watched Brandon grow up. Christine had wanted me dead. My own daughter-in-law had been hoping for my death. I sat there until the sun set, trying to make sense of it all. 3 weeks after the hearing on a Friday morning, I made a decision I'd been avoiding for days. I would visit Brandon in jail. Detective Warren had told me he was being held at the Charleston County Detention Center pending his plea agreement. She'd said he was cooperative, remorseful, and asking to see me. I'd ignored the requests at first. I wasn't ready. I didn't know if I'd ever be ready. But the questions kept eating at me. How could my son have done this? How could he have looked me in the eye in that hospital room and then gone out and forged my signature? How could he have been so cruel? I needed to hear it from him. I needed to understand. I drove to the detention center just after 9 in the morning. The building was gray concrete and razor wire, institutional and cold. I gave my name at the front desk, went through security, and was led to a visiting room divided by thick plexiglass. Phones hung on both sides for communication. I sat down and waited. A few minutes later, Brandon was brought in. He was wearing an orange jumpsuit, his hands cuffed in front of him. He looked like he'd aged 10 years in 3 weeks. His face was gaunt, his eyes red and hollow. He sat down slowly on the other side of the glass and picked up the phone. I picked up mine. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. We just looked at each other through the plexiglass, father and son separated by more than just a piece of glass. Finally, Brandon spoke, his voice breaking. "Dad, I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry." I didn't respond. I just waited. He wiped his eyes with the back of his cuffed hands. "I know you probably hate me. I know you think I'm a monster, and maybe I am. But I need you to know, I need you to understand. I didn't think I was hurting you." "You forged my signature," I said quietly. "You filed a fraudulent eviction. You tried to steal my house. How could you possibly think you weren't hurting me?" Brandon's face crumpled. "Because Christine told me you were dying." I froze. "What?" Brandon took a shuddering breath. "She showed me letters, doctor's letters. She said you had terminal cancer, stage 4. She said you had 6 months to live, maybe less. She said the hospital bills were going to bankrupt you, that you'd lose the house anyway, and that we needed to transfer it before you died, so it wouldn't get tied up in probate and medical debt." I stared at him, unable to process what I was hearing. She showed me paperwork. Brandon continued, his voice desperate now. Official-looking documents from your oncologist, test results, prognosis reports. It all looked real, Dad. I swear it looked real. I don't have cancer, I said, my voice hollow. I've never had cancer. I know that now, Brandon said, tears streaming down his face. The police showed me the real medical records. Pneumonia. That's all it was. But Christine, she faked everything. She forged doctors' signatures. She created fake lab results. She told me you were dying, and I believed her. I felt like the air had been knocked out of me. She said you didn't want me to know, Brandon continued. She said you were too proud to tell me yourself, but that she'd talked to your doctors and they'd confirmed it. She said we needed to act fast because you were getting sicker, and once you went into hospice, it would be too late. And you believed her? I asked, my voice rising. You didn't think to ask me. You didn't think to call my doctor yourself. I was scared, Brandon shouted, then lowered his voice, his shoulders shaking. I was scared, and I was desperate, and I owed so much money to people who were threatening to hurt me. Christine said this was the only way. She said we'd take care of the house, pay off the debts, and you'd never have to worry about anything. She said we were helping you. Helping me? I said, my voice cold. By stealing from me. I thought you were dying, Brandon whispered. I thought it didn't matter because you'd be gone in 6 months anyway. I thought, God, Dad, I thought I was doing the right thing. I thought I was making sure you didn't lose everything to medical bills. I sat there staring at my son through the glass, trying to reconcile what he was saying with what he'd done. Christine had lied to him. She'd fabricated medical records, forged doctors' signatures, created an entire fake terminal diagnosis to manipulate him into stealing my house. But he'd still done it. He'd still forged my signature. He'd still gone along with the plan. You could have asked me, I said quietly. You could have come to me and said, Dad, are you sick? Do you need help? You didn't. You believed your wife over your own father. Brandon sobbed openly now, his face buried in his hands. I know, and I'll never forgive myself. I was so stupid. I was so scared of the debt of the people I owed money to, and Christine kept saying this was the only way. She kept saying you'd understand, that you'd want us to have the house, that it was what you would have wanted. It wasn't what I wanted, I said. And you knew that. Somewhere inside you knew it was wrong. Brandon looked up at me, his face destroyed. I did. I knew it. But I was a coward. I let her convince me. I let my fear control me. And I hurt you, the one person who's always been there for me. I'm so sorry, Dad. I'm so sorry. I sat there for a long moment looking at my son. He looked broken, defeated. He'd lost everything, his wife, his freedom, his father's trust. The DA offered you a plea deal, I said finally. Yes. 3 years probation, community service, restitution, if I testify against Christine. Are you going to take it? Yes, Brandon said without hesitation. I'm going to tell them everything. What she did, how she manipulated me, the fake diagnosis, all of it. She destroyed me, Dad. She used me and was going to throw me away. I want her to pay for what she did to both of us. I nodded slowly. Good. Brandon wiped his eyes again. Does this mean, do you think you could ever forgive me? I looked at my son, really looked at him, and felt a war raging inside me. Part of me wanted to forgive him, to believe he'd been manipulated and used. Part of me wanted to wrap my arms around him and tell him it would be okay. But another part of me, the part that had been betrayed, that had nearly lost everything, couldn't let go of the anger. I don't know, I said honestly. I'm helping you because you're my son. because you were manipulated. But forgiveness, I don't know if I can do that. Not now. Maybe not ever. Brandon's face crumpled, but he nodded. I understand. I stood up and placed the phone back on the hook. Brandon was saying something else. Apologizing again, crying, but I couldn't hear it through the glass. I turned and walked away without looking back. 6 months later in September, I stood in the garden on a cool autumn morning, watching the leaves fall from the oak tree. The legal proceedings were over. The dust had settled. Life had returned to something resembling normal, though it would never be the same. Brandon had accepted the plea deal. 3 years of probation, 200 hours of community service and restitution to cover my legal fees. He'd also been ordered to attend a gambling addiction treatment program. Detective Warren told me he was complying with all the terms, attending every meeting, staying clean. He'd filed for divorce from Christine 2 weeks after his arrest. The divorce was finalized in July. He'd walked away with nothing, no house, no money, no wife, just his freedom and a second chance he barely deserved. Christine had gone to trial and been convicted on all counts: conspiracy to commit fraud, forgery, elder abuse, insurance fraud. The jury had deliberated for less than 3 hours. Judge Rhodes had sentenced her to 5 years in state prison. She'd shown no remorse at sentencing, hadn't even looked at me when the judge read the verdict. Jennifer Blake, the notary, had pleaded guilty to notary fraud and conspiracy. She'd been sentenced to 18 months in county jail and permanently lost her notary commission. As for me, I'd changed my will. The house at 47 Pitt Street would no longer go to Brandon. Instead, I'd arranged to donate it to the Charleston Historical Preservation Society upon my death. They would maintain it, preserve it, and use it as a museum showcasing historic Charleston homes. The house my father had built, the house I'd raised my son in, would outlive all of us. I'd also set up an educational trust fund for Brandon's children, my grandchildren. They were innocent in all of this. They deserved a future, even if their father had nearly destroyed his own. Brandon had written to me 3 times since his release. I'd read the letters, but hadn't responded. The 4th letter arrived yesterday. I sat down on the front steps with the envelope in my hands, staring at Brandon's handwriting on the front. I almost didn't open it, but something made me tear the seal. The letter was short. Dad, I'm not writing to ask for forgiveness. I don't deserve it. I'm writing because I need you to know something. I knew it was wrong. The whole time I knew it. Christine told me you were dying, and part of me wanted to believe her, because it made it easier. But deep down, I knew it didn't add up. I knew you would have told me yourself if you were sick. But I was scared. I was drowning in debt, and I let that fear turn me into someone I don't recognize. Someone who could hurt his own father. I'm not asking you to forgive me. I'm just asking you to know that I'm sorry, not sorry I got caught, but sorry I did it in the first place. I'm in treatment now. I'm facing what I did, and I'm trying to become someone better. Someone you might be proud of again someday, even if you can never trust me. I love you, Dad. I always will. Brandon? I folded the letter and sat there on the steps, feeling the weight of it in my hands. He was sorry. Maybe he even meant it. But sorry didn't undo what he'd done. Sorry didn't erase the betrayal, the fear, the nights I'd spent wondering if I was going to lose my home. I stood and walked inside, setting the letter on the kitchen counter. I didn't throw it away. I didn't tear it up. I just left it there, uncertain what to do with it. Later that afternoon, I went back out to the garden. The oak tree stood tall and strong, its branches thick with leaves that would soon turn gold and fall. My father had planted this tree when he was younger than I was now. He'd tended it, cared for it, watched it grow. I'd tried to do the same with Brandon. I'd taught him how to be kind, how to be honest, how to work hard. I'd given him everything I could. Some lessons take root, some don't. I touched the rough bark of the oak tree, feeling its age and strength beneath my palm. This tree had weathered storms, droughts, hurricanes. It had survived because its roots ran deep. I thought about Brandon's letter still sitting on the kitchen counter. I thought about forgiveness, about whether it was something I could ever give him. I didn't know the answer. Not yet. Maybe not ever. But I knew one thing: I was still here. The house was still mine. The oak tree still stood. I went back inside, picked up Brandon's letter, and placed it in the desk drawer with the others. Maybe someday I would respond. Maybe someday I would find a way to forgive. But not today. Today I would tend my garden. I would care for the house my father built. I would live the life I'd fought so hard to keep. The oak tree would stand. The house would stand. And so would I. If you've followed my story this far, you know what betrayal looks like when it wears a familiar face. I want to tell you something I wish someone had told me: trust, but verify. Even with family. Especially with family. Don't assume that blood means loyalty. Don't assume that love means honesty. And don't ever sign anything without reading it yourself, understanding it yourself, and keeping copies for yourself. I was lucky. I had medical records that proved where I was when my signature was forged. I had a nurse who took notes. I had a judge who saw through the lies. But not everyone is that fortunate. Protect yourself. Keep your documents safe. Know who has access to your finances, your property, your life. And if something feels wrong, if someone is asking strange questions, pressuring you to sign papers, or acting secretive, don't ignore that feeling. Trust your instincts. I've learned that some relationships can't be saved, no matter how much you want them to be. I've learned that forgiveness doesn't mean reconciliation. And I've learned that protecting yourself isn't selfish, it's necessary. The Bible says to honor your father and mother, but it also says to be wise as serpents and innocent as doves. Wisdom means recognizing when someone, even someone you love, is trying to harm you. My house still stands. My oak tree still grows. And I'm still here tending the garden my father planted. That's enough. Don't let fear, debt, or desperation turn you into someone you're not. And don't let anyone steal what you've built. Thanks for staying with me through Harold's fight against family fraud. Drop a comment. What would you have done facing a son who forged your signature? I'm curious about your view. If this touched you, consider subscribing for more stories. Quick note. Though rooted in elder exploitation realities, some aspects were dramatized for narrative purposes. If this doesn't suit your taste, explore other content that fits better.